Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the publisher of TheChocolateLife.com. Before we jump into the topic of today's post, which is going to be the November news and AMA, I've got two regular announcements. The first one of which is that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by members of The Chocolate Life. If you're not currently a member, please go over there and join TheChocolateLife.com as a free member or as a premium member if you have the resources to be able to devote to this. And also, please go into the comments, whether it's the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me know where in the world you're connecting from. And I'll get that shout out up on screen. And also, if you ask a question, I'll try to get that question or make a comment. I'll get that up on screen and I'll respond to it during the course of today's episode. And with that, what I want to do is share the home page of The Chocolate Life right now. So this is live. You can go there. This is exactly what it is that you're seeing. And what I'd like to point out is a new feature of The Chocolate Life, which is on the home page, there is this advertising position. And this advertising position is only used at the moment for festivals, but I'm opening it up for festivals as well as for classes. So if you're running a festival and you'd like to have your festival promoted here on The Chocolate Life on the homepage, or you'd like to, if you have a class and you'd like to promote the class, you can email me at member support and I'll take care of that for you. And also like to point out that it is 11 o'clock here, Mountain Standard Time. We went through daylight savings time this past weekend, and I was in Brussels, and we went through daylight savings time. I haven't done through daylight savings time time changes twice in the last 2 weeks. And so from here until the changeover again, the time is going to be 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, which means that it's going to be the same time in Pacific as well as Central and East Coast time. So there's just no confusion. I wanted it to be the least inconvenient, I think is the way to talk about it, for most people. And I'm sorry for inconvenience everybody who went from mountain time, daylight time to standard time. There's just an hour later. And with that, what I want to do is I want to also mention that for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post. Now, one of the reasons why I put together this post is that I've made available the episodes of Pod Save Chocolate, all of them, 70 of the 80 that there currently are, as audio podcasts. And so if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you do have access to your computer. What you can do is the link to each episode's post is in the podcast description. And so you can go and follow along and look at all the resources that are available that are mentioned during the course of the hour. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that as well. And before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri at Kittredge, Blue Spruce Chocolates in Kittredge, Colorado. Mark asked me about what the effects of the wildfires were going to be in cacao in the Beni region of Bolivia. I did reach out to Volker Lehmann, and he gave me some information, and I will be able to give you some information about what's going on there. He's also saying that, you've had some snow. We had our first snow here in Prescott before Halloween. I mean, it's like the second week of October, very, very early to have snow here from what it is that I'm told. And we'll talk about that, what's going on in the Beni over the course of the hour. And with that, what I want to do is scroll down through today's episode links. And so the first place that I want to start every November episode is going to take a look at where things are in the commodities market for cocoa. And I'm sorry for all these pop-ups, but what we're doing is we're seeing that there is there's some gentle upward pricing pressure on cocoa, even though what it appears to be is that Ghana and other countries in West Africa are fairly sanguine that the 2024-2025 harvest is going to be better than this past harvest. And so some of the supply side issues appear to be resolved. Now, this may also be in part because there are some desires to, not some desires. They're pushing back the date for implementing compliance with the EUDR. But what we can see is also one of the things that happened is that the last time we took a look at this, and a month ago, is that the 2026 pricing was in down under or is around $4,000 a metric ton. And so there is some upward pricing in terms of long-term contracts for cocoa into 2026. Now, one of the reasons why I want to present this on a regular basis is if you're importing cocoa beans from anywhere, you're buying cocoa beans from some supplier, you want to be aware of what the prices are. Even if you don't have the resources to invest in a hedging scheme, right, or any other kind of trading scheme, knowing where prices are likely to go is going to be a long-term forecasting, long-term planning capability for you. You should be hitting these links at least on a monthly basis, if not a little bit more often. Make it part of your Monday setup or your Friday close down routine, just to check in and see where prices are going. And so this is barchart.com. I take a look at them because they're really, really good snapshots for where they are. They're very simple, and you can sign up for a free account. Another place to look, apart from just the intraday pricing, is historical pricing. So we can go and take a look. Again, we have the 2026 pricing, but we can take a look at this in terms of past pricing. And we can know what it is that's going on. Just quick updates in terms of understanding what pricing pressure is going to be on cocoa. So you can have an idea about where prices are going to be over the course of the next little while. For me, I also like the moving average chart. For some reason, I thought I was logged in and I'm not, which is one of the reasons why I'm getting all these pop-ups. But this moving average gives you an idea about where things are for the current cash price and what has happened over that price. So the 20-day moving average, we go from 7,300 to 7,200. The 50-day moving average is from roughly 7,800 to 7,250, 7,275. But you can get an idea for a trajectory here. And again, just keep in mind that this is where the price of cocoa is moving. Again, so you're not completely gobsmacked surprised when all of a sudden the price goes crazy. Or there's a drop in price. Either way, you want to know what's going on. And then finally, this is one, it's from another website, Trading Economics, and it gives you, if you're more of a visual person rather than you want to take a look at things, you can say, you can get an idea about what the volatility is and where things are going. So we can see that, in the last month, we've, had, a fair amount of volatility. And just to give yourself an idea about where the price of cocoa is going. It's worthwhile to go take a look. Now, I also want to go take a look. So this is a new website. It's relatively new. It's a newsletter from the previous editor of Confectionery News. Has put this website called Cocoa Radar. You can subscribe to it. I may be free subscription, not entirely sure about what's that. I subscribed to it early, and so I've got it. But this is an article talking about the fact that it looks like there are more complicating factors in what cocoa is likely to do. So we see the fact that more cocoa from Cameroon and more rain in Cote d'Ivoire, and the fact that CocoaBod is bullish on the next year's harvest. What it's doing is it's adding to the volatility of cocoa. And what we're seeing is that cocoa prices rally on a deficit forecast despite an uptick in production. Which is, why is that the case? Now, you should read through this and get an understanding for where things are. And just to get an idea, what's, again, one of the things that I'm not really excited about is that Anthony doesn't necessarily cite primary sources that you can link through to. So he's just taking press releases and other kinds of things, perhaps conversations that he's had with people, and putting the summaries here. And he's actually doing a nice job. I can't fault him for that. But harvest pressures in the Ivory Coast are also undercutting cocoa prices after government data earlier this week showed that the country's farmers shipped 285,000 metric tons from 1st of October to 27th of October, up 26% over last year. But take a look at some of the other complicating factors. JP Morgan predict a cocoa deficit next year of 100,000 metric tons. in the 2024-2025 year, whereas other forecasts have said there's going to be a surplus next year, or it's going to be break even. So what does this mean? What it says is that global stockpiles, um, um, you know, are near a 19-year low last Friday of nearly 2 million bags. So there's less cocoa in stock, imports in other stockpiles, and that's just in the U.S. And they've been trending lower for the past 17 months and fell to a 19-year low. And so this notion of pricing and what is supporting the pricing and how forecasting and how the analysts are affecting the cocoa price is complicated. And so that's why you should know about all of these things. All right. So that's my take on the cocoa market right now, is that there is volatility, continued volatility. The prices are staying up at the 7,000 mark, I think, a longer than many people expected than they do. And the 2-year forecast now has cocoa prices in the mid fives rather than somewhere in the low fours. So good thing to know about what's going on as you're planning cocoa purchases over the course of the next couple of years. So that's where the market forecast is. If anybody has questions about any of that, they can go into the comments, live chat on YouTube, the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me know, or just let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I don't need to know whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. I see that. I mean, that's not a problem. But is it the United States? Are you connecting from overseas? I'll get that shout out up on screen for you. So that's it. And now for other news. And this is the first episode that I've done in 2 weeks. So the last one I did was 2 weeks ago, Friday. I was in Brussels for most of the time, attending a conference, and I do have a news note from there. But while I was away, what I want to do is for people who don't know, there was a very influential member of the cocoa community named Ed Seguin, who passed away. Now, Ed had been sick for quite some time. It was well known within the community that he was quite ill. I don't know that anybody was expecting him to pass away so soon. I certainly wasn't. But I was not completely aware of the nature and severity of what it is that he was suffering from, although I know it is something that we've done for a while. So for people who don't know Ed Seguin, for many, many years, he worked for the Guittard Company, but he is also one of the guiding forces behind the underpinnings of the process associated with both the Cacao of Excellence evaluation standards, as well as the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund projects. So if you go take a look at the way both of those projects are organized and what they attempt to do, the methodologies are very, very similar. And one of the people who's responsible for helping put together those methodologies is Ed. He was a Mars Fellow for some time, just a really, really, really nice person. I was looking for a video of his that I did many, many years ago, where he was doing a tasting and was talking about chocolate and the flavor of a chocolate that he'd been tasting in terms of a symphony. I'm still going to look for it, right? And if I can find it, I will embed it on this page because it's a local video. He's just a really, really nice guy. He and I had many, for me, very, very influential conversations. I remember being at Chocoa in 2015 with him and Brigitte La Liberté, also involved with the organization of the Cacao of Excellence, where we were working on the idea for a replacement for spider graphs to talk about chocolate flavor. And shortly thereafter, I worked up a replacement for a spider graph and worked with a colleague to be able to come up with a method of automating the generation of those graphs. And it's called a radial pie chart. And it's very, very simple change to the way a spider graph works, but nonetheless makes it much, much easier and faster to be able to go, oh, here's what's happens. Here's how I'm describing the components of a flavor of chocolate. And that was done with the Ed Seguin. The other, another really, really important conversation I remember having with Ed was around the notion of aging cocoa beans, and not necessarily aging cocoa beans for months and months and months or years and years and years, but a requirement to age cocoa beans from the time they get off the drying pad until the time you convert them into chocolate. And that may not seem obvious, but it turns out that there's not been much research on this particular topic, because by the time cocoa beans make it from the producing country, from the drying pad to the port of export, and then from the port of export to the import, and then to the chocolate makers, at least 3 months will have passed that it happens. And that's about the time that the beans need to do that initial aging process. And what you find is that if you do a very, very fresh bean, there is a flavor which I would characterize as wet cardboard. And that wet cardboard flavor is very, very difficult to overcome in very, very fresh beans. You do need to let them age for at least 90 days, if not longer. There's some chemical equilibration that is happening, something that's settling down that that happens during those first 90 days. So if you are a chocolate maker working in a producing country, making chocolate from beans, right, that are produced in the country, and you take them directly off the drying pad into the chocolate making process, you do complicate things in terms of flavor development. You do need to wait for this at least 90 days. And I remember very, very distinctly having this conversation with Ed, and he said he discovered it because he and a colleague were doing some evaluation of cocoa beans for Cacao of Excellence, and his colleague processed the beans, in the producing country, I believe it was Trinidad, right away, and he didn't get an opportunity to process the beans until months later. And normally their taste buds were very, very much in sync, and they were ending up with very, very different results in terms of what they were receiving in terms of the flavor. And after talking it all through, they realized that one of the primary differences was this aging. So just mentioning it, Ed's presence will be sorely missed. He's just a great guy, very generous with his time, extremely gracious, very thoughtful, and meeting him at chocolate festivals and professional events around the world was always something that I treasured over the course of the more than a decade that I've known him. And So yeah, if you're not familiar with Ed, and you think about the recent push in the last decade or so to think about how do we standardize cocoa evaluations from an organoleptic perspective, not just the visual cut test, but how do we take cocoa beans and produce better chocolate from them, and what are the standards that we're going to use, and what are the methodologies that we're going to use. Ed has been, at or near the center of this for quite some time. And we're looking to see, and maybe it's too soon to see, who's going to step up into to try to fill those very, very, very large shoes. So yeah. So anyway, if you weren't familiar with Ed, you weren't familiar with his background, and you had or were aware of him and was not aware of his passing, that is in fact the case. So the next bit of news is, I was in Brussels. One of the reasons why I missed the last 2 weeks of episodes. I was in Brussels for the 2024 annual symposium for the British Society of Flavorists. And the topic of the symposium was on chocolate flavor. And, it was like a room full of people. There were 20, 25 people who had signed up for the symposium. And one of the presenters was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Schieberle, who is known, who I've known since 2011 or 2012 with a paper that he published on chocolate flavor. And one of the things that he said, which struck me and was a little bit of controversial, is that you can take some of the flavor components that you associate with things like cooked cabbage and beef suet and human sweat and potato chips and other things, apricots and other things like that. And you can reconstitute chocolate flavor from those chemical elements. And I remember, very distinctly using that information when I was putting together my first seminars and presentations called How Chocolate Gets Its Taste. The first one I did, I believe, in 2012 for the Experimental Cuisine Collective at New York University, and trying to explain the components. And so I went into the symposium, knowing that Dr. Schieberle was going to be there, and trying to make sure that I and my co-presenter Zoe Papalexandratou weren't duplicating any of what it is that he was talking about. But our goal in our presentation was to say, here's a group of flavorists. What they do is they come at this by deconstructing something. So they don't think of chocolate necessarily. They think of chocolate in terms of its component flavor chemicals. And so what they'll do is they'll take, this chemical plus this chemical plus this chemical, and they'll put them together, and they'll decide based on what the delivery matrix is. Am I delivering it in fat? Am I delivering it in a carbohydrate gel? Am I delivering it, like a gummy? Am I delivering it in water? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a combination of chemicals and try to reconstitute the flavor of chocolate. And what Zoe and I wanted to do was we wanted to say, what we wanted to do is give to people in the audience this idea that let's think about the flavor of chocolate. How does chocolate get its flavor? And looking at the components of genetics and post-harvest processing and the malleability and fungibility of post-harvest processing in order to be able to take specific genetics and be able to deliver very, very different flavor profiles from the same beans, which is the work that Zoe had been doing with Ingemann in Nicaragua and other places around the world. But in listening to Dr. Schieberle's presentation, which was like lots of chemistry. And unfortunately, I can't share, although I have all of his slides. Unfortunately, I don't have permission to share with this audience all of his slides yet. We're trying to figure out a way to make that sharing possible. Really, really fascinating presentation. There was, when I have been describing chocolate flavor, and Mark, you may remember we had this conversation in a previous episode within the last couple of months, and then we followed up in the comments about how different melting points of cocoa butter will affect flavor release, right? And that makes sense, right? If I have something which is very, very cold, for example, I put a chocolate bar in the refrigerator or freezer, and then I put it in my mouth and I start biting on it and chewing it, I have to do a lot of work to warm up the chocolate bar to the point where the cocoa butter melts. And the cocoa butter melts is going to deliver a lot of the flavors. So we have flavor is a combination of aroma and taste. So aroma is primarily in the nose, taste is primarily in the tongue and elsewhere in the mouth. And at different points in the process, as the cocoa butter melts, and you'll get different flavor chemical release, right? So you'll get different aroma and different taste chemicals releasing. And so that makes sense. But what I hadn't considered, and I actually not only not considered, was just completely unaware of the fact that there are secondary reactions that are happening when you consider how the flavor chemicals that are in chocolate, right, get to be perceived by your nervous system, sensory system. And that is that there are reactions that happen between the saliva in your mouth and water more generally, but the saliva in your mouth and chemicals that are in the chocolate. So as the cocoa butter melts and as these chemicals become available to the water in your mouth, the saliva in your mouth, there is a series of secondary and tertiary chemical reactions that are beginning to happen that might take between 30 seconds or a minute or more for them to become present consciously, so where you can sense them. So technically, you might think that this is, so it was characterized that one of the chemical components are the creation of what are called Strecker aldehydes. If you know anything about organic and analytic chemistry, maybe you know what Strecker aldehydes are. I don't. There was a lot of discussion of very, very deep chemistry during the course of the seminar, during the symposium. But I think that what's interesting for me, and perhaps the takeaway that you're going to take from this, is that there are, in fact, a whole series of chemical reactions that are happening in the mouth on the chocolate that contribute to the medium aftertaste. I mean, we've got this taste that evolves in the mouth over time, and what we think of as the finish and the long finish. And as the cocoa as the chocolate melts and it goes back into your throat, that there are all these other secondary chemical reactions and tertiary chemical reactions that are that are based entirely that are catalyzed by the water in your mouth, by your saliva, which begin to happen. And I don't know what the precursor chemicals are, which lead to the formation of these Strecker aldehydes and other chemicals that contribute to this phenomenon. But that's what's going on. And so as we're thinking about, not just the initial taste, the initial aroma, right? So that initial flavor, but as the way the flavor evolves over time, it's not just the melting of the cocoa butter. It is, in fact, these chemical reactions which are catalyzed by your saliva, which are contributing to that. And if there are a certain class, one of them may be these chemicals called oxazolines. Maybe a part of it, not entirely sure. But there was a presentation on oxazolines at the seminar. So it was just, really, really geeking on the organic analytic chemistry component of this to understand what's going on, not just in the conversion of chemicals in the cocoa bean during fermentation and the creation of pyrazines and other chemicals and Maillard reaction components during roasting, for example, but what's happening in the mouth. It was just incredibly fascinating. And it was eye-opening for me. And it's something, if you're geeking out on all this kind of stuff and you want to know, go take a look at this kind of chemical reaction that's happening in your mouth. Very, very complicated, very, very complicated. The other thing that I wanted to say, which is very interesting, and again, part of Dr. Schieberle's presentation, is that there appear to be some receptors throughout your body. They're in your blood cells and they're in your gastrointestinal system, which contribute to your feelings of well-being and satiety. This is not all happening in the mouth. It's not all happening in the nose, but it's actually happening in the bloodstream and in other organs of the body. I know that somewhere in the video, somewhere in the presentation, there's a mention of what those chemicals are. And I don't know that there's a precise understanding yet of exactly what's going on. But I thought it was also very, very interesting that one of the topics that was discussed was the fact that our love for chocolate, our ideas of how it affects our mood, how it affects our satiety, our feeling of fullness, what is in fact perhaps addictive about chocolate, its chemical and textural aspects of it, don't just arise in the mouth and the nose. That the entire digestive system is involved, as well as in fact perhaps your blood system as well, your circulatory system. I'm just sitting here, and it was a very long day, and it had been a long trip getting there, so it was just bang, 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 lots of stuff going on. But I thought that was really, really fascinating, and I'm going to go and have to update. Number one, I did mention that I've been working on a new book called The Pyramid Tasting Handbook. The Pyramid Tasting Handbook, I'm working on it right now. It's going to be published by the end of November. It's available for pre-order right now as a personalized PDF. If you want to, you can go to this page. Let me show you. You can go to this page on The Chocolate Life, and you can place a pre-order for your copy of the Pyramid Tasting Handbook. And I'm going to have to update some of the text in some parts. I promise not to get too geeky, but there is a chapter where it's nothing but geek level stuff. And so I'm going to have to update this as a result of some of what it is that I learned from going to this symposium. And while I'm there and while I'm sharing stuff, what I want to do is also point out that I just released a copy of the 2024 member newsletter. I sent it out to all members yesterday. If you are a member, you should have received this in your inbox. You get the full email, not just a notification the email is coming. I'm logged in, and so I can show you all the different components that are in the newsletter. So I do a little bit of overview of my trip to Brussels, and there's a link to my full Brussels trip report right there. I do this overview. For people who don't know, this is my friend Laurent Gerbeau, who runs, I think, one of the more interesting confectionery operations that you can find in the central Brussels area, just a short walk from the Grand Place and the Grootmarkt. And this is his new dog, Bullet. So we had a chance on Saturday afternoon in just a glorious day in Brussels. I mean, seasonably warm, just bright and clear. Temperature was in the low 70s, which is just remarkable for this time of year. I had a chance to sit with Laurent for about an hour outside the shop and share a beer and have conversations about a lot of things. And get some additional gossip and stuff like that. But we also did have an opportunity to go and visit. I did a short walking tour. Short walking tour, 5 hours, was what it ended up being, including the time we spent with Laurent. But here is the mannequin piece. I don't think this is in silver compound. It may be. We didn't walk into the shop. But, this is what Belgium chocolate looks like for the most part. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. Maybe it's NSFW. I mean, it's like, what am I looking at here? It's pretty crazy for Halloween. And then I also had a fabulous lunch with Laurent Scrutiny, who runs the Art of Chocolate, and at a place called Au Vieux Saint-Martin. People who know French will know that vieux basically means old. And I'm trying to say, why is this Au Vieux Saint-Martin? If you look at this as in the Place du Grand Sablon, there's nowhere near the place where there's anything like a church or anything that labeled Saint-Martin. There's nothing by that. It turns out that this is just the first of a number of restaurants which are named Saint Martin for some reason or another. So old, the first Saint Martin. So just really, really quick. I thought it was pretty funny to be able to have that realization. So you can go, and if you're a member, you'll be able to read the entire newsletter. Even if you're not a member, I believe that I released the Brussels Overloaded Revisited. And I call it that because I did a 2020 trip report. This is the mannequin piece. And one of the things that I talk about, so again, here I am at, Laurent Gerbeau's shop. The day that I arrived, I had some time. I wanted, after traveling from Prescott to Phoenix to Chicago to Brussels, I was just like, it was crazy. I was feeling like I'd been indoors for far too long, including the overnight trip. So I ended up doing a walking tour just to refamiliarize myself. It was 4 years since I've been in Brussels with the neighborhood. So here's some of the display case at Laurent Gerbeau's shop. I'm waiting for my order to arrive. And one of the things that I really, really like is that every time you order a hot beverage, and maybe anything for table service, I'm not entirely sure, they will say, pick one piece out of the case. It doesn't really matter. So there's a wonderful little lagniappe that you get. And this is a speculoos bonbon that I got. This is the presentation of the hot chocolate. What I would say is it's not a French style, very, very thick hot chocolate, and it's not a powdered mix hot chocolate. It is something that you could go, and it's sort of the Goldilocks, sort of intermediary. It's not too thick, it's not too rich, it's not too light, it's not too sweet. It's somewhere in the middle. And this is the presentation. So an adult could order it and enjoy it, and a child could order it and enjoy it, which is really, really nice. So I thought and so that's one of the things that I ordered. And they also had, this was the daily torte, which is a mousse au chocolat. And here is the opening of the speculoos bonbon. And by the way, if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, you can go and watch it on the video podcast the episode, which is archived on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. And then you can also go and look at it by clicking through to this post on The Chocolate Life. They are there at all times. And as you can see, here is the mousse au chocolat, the torte. Those are cocoa nibs, which are on the surface of it. And this was an intensely rich, but actually very light. It's not a very, very light mousse, but it's not. But it is mousse-like, if that makes sense in terms of talking about it. It was just the perfect sort of thing for relaxing after a long day's travels. Okay? The other thing which I wanted to talk about, and this is something that a Chocolate Life member responded to about this, so Kurt responded to, is for a long time I've been thinking about what I call sort of the Belgian chocolate paradox. And the real question, the base of this question is, why Belgium? Why does Belgium has a reputation for being the best chocolate in the world? Where did that come from? Right? And the answer is, I don't know that anybody knows why this is the case. And I've been looking for an answer to it for some time. So, for example, the Belgians did invent the modern praline, or what the French call bonbon. So, usually shell molded, or very, very often shell molded in Belgium. But people like Laurent Gerbeau and Frederic Blondel and others are doing enrobed slabbed ganaches and slabbed pralines, right? Fillings, praline fillings, right? And Neuhaus, which was founded in the 1850s, right, is also known for the invention of the ballot and box. Right? So that's what Belgium is known for in terms of inventions. They didn't invent the cocoa butter press. They didn't invent alkalization. I don't think they invented couverture, which had been suggested to me that the Belgians invented couverture. And this would have been well before the Fry family were the first, apparently reported to be the first people to add cocoa butter to chocolate liquor in order to be able to make a smoother bar of chocolate. And so this is a story that I had known and been told and been repeating, right? That in 1847, the Fry family was the first family to create, the first what we might identify as a modern chocolate bar. When, as a matter of fact, the couverture might have been invented by the Van Houtens shortly after their patenting of their first cocoa butter press, which would have been late 18 teens or late 1820s. So more than 2 decades before the Fry family. And so what else did the Belgians invent? Well, they didn't invent any of the machinery that we think of. They're not the inventor of the roll mill. They're not the inventor of the the melanger. They're not. These are technologies that have been invented in other countries. So why Belgium? I don't know the answer to that question. I still don't know the answer to that question. But the paradox for me is, if you were to go take a look at the tourist areas of chocolate, the very heavily touristy areas of chocolate. So we're talking about the street from the Mannequin Piece towards the Grand Place. And then as you go from the Grand Place towards the Grote Markt and the Queen's Gallery, which is just off the Grote Markt. What you will do is you'll find things like, okay, I have a Godiva store to my right, and then to my left, there will be a Mary store. And keep in mind that there's a Mary, which is a Belgian company, and a Mary, which is a Japanese company. They're not the same things. They're not the same companies. And then in between them is a store called La Belgique Gourmand, right? And Godiva is an upscale international brand. It's an upmarket international brand. I don't know how well known Mary is known outside of Belgium, but it is a boutique brand, an upmarket brand in terms of its presentation. And La Belgique Gourmand is definitely a down market brand, right? So if you look at it, for example, you'll see that there is a buy 4 get 1 free up front of it. It's just, and if you look at it inside, you know, you know, it looks pedestrian. If you see a colored Mannequin Piece replica, and if it's bright yellow or bright pink or some other color like that, they're using compound, right, to do it. There's just down market chocolate. But if you're standing there on the Grand Place and you see this La Belgique Gourmand, and then you go around the corner to Rue de la Colline, I believe, which is the way you get to the Grote Markt from there are at least 2 more La Belgique Gourmands around the corner, like literally within maybe 50 meters of each other, if not closer together. And on that little short one block, La Rue de la Colline, there are 2 other chocolate stores which market themselves as like gourmet Belgian or Belgium's finest or the Belgian. So they're fresh Belgian chocolate, right? And so for me, the paradox is, how does anyone determine, right, what to do? You're doing it based on price. You like, how do you go, right, and make a decision about what chocolate that you're going to buy? And furthermore, how can both of those things, how can La Belgique Gourmande, right, and um, Neuhaus and Godiva and Leonidas and other brands like that that people think of as upmarket, how can those both represent Belgium's finest? How do they both represent the best chocolate in the world? One of them is, right, or is maybe Belgium, maybe Neuhaus is the best chocolate in the world, or maybe it is Belgium's finest. I don't think it is, right? I can easily mention half a dozen other makers that I think produce better product than Neuhaus does, right? And so I don't think of any of them as. But again, is Belgian chocolate somehow different from um, French chocolate? What makes Belgian chocolate uniquely Belgium? All right, is it the savoir-faire, the knowledge that's associated with Belgian chocolate makers? Technical. I mean, it's like I am hard pressed to understand what it is that's going on that does this still. And here is the crowd around the mannequin piece. There was an Oompa band. I'm gonna get that a little larger for you. Again, if you're following along at home, you can make this work for you. All right. So you can't see this, but the mannequin piece is up here, and you may not be able to tell from this side, but immediately to the left of this is a Neuhaus store. And behind me is a store from this company called Elizabeth. Um, and if you look at it, one of the things you'll see is their sort of letter X style Frishogi in the front. They're actually called Brissure in here. And you look in and you go, this looks like it's kind of a down market shop, but then, and it's right across from the mannequin piece, and it's right across from the Neuhaus. So I'm expecting a sort of very, very touristy kind of experience here. Um, um, but you look in, and what you do is you see that there is a case full of individual pieces, right? Unfortunately, if you look closely, if you look at this piece, this dark, what you'll notice is that some of the pieces are beginning to show bloom. So it's not being merchandised very, very well. But Elizabeth not only makes their own products in their own kitchen, but they also sell products from other chocolate makers, one of which is Frederick Blondel, which are the rectangular, or the rectangular pieces you're seeing over here. I don't remember the name of the company. Cento or something like that reminds me. I'm reminded of the name. Unfortunately, I didn't go and take a look. The ones that are the squares are much more traditional flavorings. The ones that are in the batons, the rectangular pieces, are much more modern flavors. And I ended up buying 8 pieces, and that generalization turns out to be true. Unfortunately, I'm looking at this and I'm going, man, the people who are managing the case should be pulling these pieces out and then cutting them up and giving them away as samples, because I don't think you could legitimately sell these, or shouldn't be legitimately selling these. So here are the Frederick Blondel. And so you've got a basil ganache, a bay leaves and red berries, black pepper, the Costa Rican, there's a mint. I mean, lots of really, really interesting flavors. Again, I bought, I think, 5 of these and 3 of the others, and was impressed. These are very, very well made. The shells are very, very thin. There's a range of ganache textures. So some of them are quite soft, some of them are quite wet, some of them are quite firm. I don't know if that's age or not, but they were generally very, very tasty. This bay leaf and red berries with the gold dust on the cover, on the outside decoration was particularly interesting, I thought, and which says you got to be careful when you're looking at where you are, specifically right across from the mannequin piece, and I'm surrounded by cheap chocolate stores. Right, all of a sudden there's this one which I would not have paid attention to if the Laurence Kootenai with whom I had lunch had not said, did I go because I was there? And I said, it didn't occur to me to walk in. I just figured it was a down market shop, right? So you have to look carefully. These are examples. I believe that these are pieces that they're creating in-house. I'm not entirely sure. This is their version of frisch shogi. They're called brochure. Just really, really attractive pieces. And so what I want to do is then move from the area around the mannequin piece towards the area around the Grootmarkt. And so this is the Queen's Gallery. And it's it's 2 blocks long. So you walk through one block, then there's an open segment, and you go through another block. It's just really, really pretty. This is like 10,000 people a day walk through this. I mean, if you are, got a retail and you got a retail business, you can afford a shop on this location, you are guaranteed huge amounts of foot traffic. But unfortunately, there's a lot of chocolate stores on this and chocolate shops here. And you have to figure out how I'm going to stand out in this very, very crowded retail environment. So apparently there's a Neuhaus shop in the Queen's Market. And apparently this is the original Neuhaus location, which was originally an apothecary. And John Neuhaus started his business as an apothecary, and apothecaries often delivered their medicines in chocolate. But this is apparently the original location. So you got a Neuhaus, you have a Mary, which is right across the way. You have a Leonidas or Leonidas, which is right there. But right next to it is this La Belgique Gourmande. And we have this fresh Belgian chocolate shop. And then you have this Délices du Roi and a Belgian chocolate factory, and Maison d'Andoé, which is more of a cafe restaurant, but well known for waffles, among other things. And here is another company, the Corn Royal, I believe is the name of it. But the challenge when you walk in is, how do you really tell the difference, right? And the fact that there are 2 Pier Marcolini locations, right, in the same 2-block covered market. How do you tell the difference between the two of them? And how do you distinguish? And so one of the things that I'm going to suggest, if you do end up going to Brussels and you're looking at figuring out is a shop down market or up market, is to go take a look and see if there are any cases, right? If there's a case where you can buy individual pieces, chances are it's an upmarket shop, as opposed to if everything is in a box or anything is a bag and you can't sample any of the individual bonbons which might be in a box, or pralines which might be in a box, chances are you're in a down market shop. Now, it's not universal that this is the case, but it's a good indicator that you're going to be in a place which is slightly upmarket. And even signs like this is handmade, yeah, there's a place on the Place de Grand Sablon called Passion Chocolate. It says everything is handmade. I didn't see anything in it which suggested, I didn't see any pieces which suggested they might not be handmade, right? So I think that's, but just because it's handmade doesn't mean it's good, right? And so again, we have this, how do I determine? This is the paradox of Belgian chocolate for me, right? Part of it is why Belgium? And the other one is with, how do all of these different levels of quality, some of which is fit and finish, and a lot of the stuff is obviously industrially made, one-shot machines and very little handwork. How do you tell, how you have these 2 different extremes? What makes Belgian chocolate uniquely Belgian chocolate that makes it the best chocolate in the world? It was really a struggle for me. Maybe this is just something that's in my mind, right? And I'm just making it up. I don't know the answer to that question, but it is still a quandary for me. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm really, really confused about it. So one last bit of information, one last bit of sort of things that came together as a result of this visit to Brussels is that when I was there in 2020, right, I mentioned that there's in this post, there's a Godiva store, and then one door over, there was a Mary store, and between there was a La Belgique Gourmande. when I was there 4 years ago, there was a sign that says this is soon going to become a Marcolini store. And there were rumors at the time that Marcolini was struggling financially. And so as we were heading into COVID, um, I was wondering if that store was in fact ever going to open, and it never did. It got turned into a La Belgique Gourmand. I'm not entirely sure when it opened. And I learned that Marcolini had been for sale essentially since sometime in 2019. Right, and here's where the interesting overlap and irony comes in, which is an investor, an Asian investor group, some Japanese and some Korean money, I was told, I didn't independently verify that, went in and did a big investment in Marcolini. I don't know if it means they have a majority ownership position, but they went in and purchased Marcolini, invested heavily in Marcolini. They also ended up buying Godiva Asia from Yildiz, the Turkish holding company that bought it from Campbell's. So, what was already a really complicated history. So, Godiva is now a Turkish company with production in the United States, but it's a different entity to some extent in Belgium. It's even more fragmented by the fact that Yildiz sold off Godiva in Southeast Asia, at least Japan and Korea, to this investment group. And what it looks like is happening in Southeast Asia is that this group is closing down the Godiva retail operations. Right now, they may continue to work in duty free, but the branded Godiva locations are going to be shut down, with an emphasis on moving online. So whatever that means, but that they're going to be opening up the Godiva locations as Marcolini locations. So there is this interesting connection between investors and Godiva and Marcolini, which I just thought was just, really the world is very, very small. And for me, it like brings this question of, why Belgium, and is Belgium the finest in the world? It makes it even harder for me to be able to detect what the issues are going to be. I don't know the answer to that question. Right. So the next to the last story that I want to talk about for this episode is the wildfires in Bolivia. And it turns out there have also been fires in Belize. And Mark, thank you for sending me the link to the story by Uncommon. I will add that link into today's episode notes. But what I also wanted to do is talk a little, very, very quickly about what I learned from Volker Lehmann about what's going on in the Beni. And what he tells me is that when it comes to an island where cacao is grown, where cocoa grows in the Beni, these are called chocolatales, these chocolate islands. It turns out that perhaps only one has been burned over, and it is in the town of Baures, or outside the town of Baures, near the town of Baures, which is not far from where the Hacienda Tranquilidad, which is where Volker is located, is. But the fires have not directly threatened the chocolatale on which the Hacienda Tranquilidad is located. So that's good. However, what Volker tells me is that the smoke is so intense, the smoke has been so bad that it has caused respiratory problems for a lot of people over the course of the last month. So these fires are much more widespread than they have been. They're burning up large areas of the savanna and generating huge amounts of smoke. Now, while there is this health hazard associated with the smoke, what has also happened is that it has reduced the amount of sunlight which has hit the trees. And so we don't know yet, because of the reduced sunlight, how that's going to affect the harvest, which is coming up. I think primary harvest is December, January. So we don't know if the yield is going to be affected negatively, but chances are it most definitely will. Because there's all the smoke in the air, it's also changing rainfall patterns. And so there's no clue yet as to, for example, if the harvest is delayed because it's been so dark, right, and then it starts raining during the harvest, what that's going to mean. So we really don't understand yet what the impact is going to be in that area of the Beni. So this is the Atenes region of the eastern Beni. It is not the Alto Beni. The Alto Beni is still in the La Paz department, which is much further north. right? So, but this is what's going on there, and this is what Volker tells me. Um, he is not. He is thinking that the harvest this year is not going to be up to what it was in previous years, primarily because of the impact that the clouds of smoke have had on letting light into the trees and for the pods to grow to maturity. So, but what we'll do is we'll see how that goes over the course of the next several months. I will check in with Volker over the course of the next several months, and I will get some updates from him about what his thoughts are, and I will post them on the Chocolate Life to let people know. Now, there are also been fires down in Belize, wildfires down in Belize that have had a significant effect on cocoa production in the primary growing district, which is south in Toledo, the Toledo district. And I've spent quite some time in the Punta Gorda region, or Punta Gorda is a town within the Toledo district, and so I'm familiar with the area. But apparently, there's been a huge impact on the farmers there. Belize is not a huge exporter of cocoa, but we need to consider the effects of climate change in terms of an increase in the risk of fires and what that fire risk does to the productivity of the trees and to the livelihoods of farmers. And one thing I want to do, next to last here, because I'm just add this, is that I read on Instagram post recently where an authority was posting that cocoa only grows between 20 degrees north and south of the equator, and that's not true, right? So if you're in your vocabulary, in your repertoire, you're talking to people and you're saying cocoa only grows plus or minus 20 degrees of the equator, that's not true, right? Because cocoa grows in Taiwan, and the furthest south point in Taiwan is 21 something degrees north of the equator. So that's outside the 20-degree zone. And Japan is north of that, and 26 some odd degrees in the part of Japan where cocoa grows. So we need to step away from an absolute that cocoa only grows plus or minus 20 degrees of the equator to be able to say most of the cocoa in the world, and there are some exceptions, and there are some interesting exceptions. Now, it turns out that the Hainan province, which is in China, which is where cocoa grows, is within the 20-degree band. We just from a geography perspective, I don't think most people have a really good understanding for where things are. Generally, like which one is the Tropic of Cancer north or south of the equator, right? And where is it? But just a really quick understanding that we need to get away from the absoluteness of this. So the final thing that I want to talk about today, and before I do that, what I want to do is remind everybody that this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by members of the Chocolate Life. So if you could go to TheChocolateLife.com, I'm going to scroll over there and get to the homepage and point it. So if you could go over to the homepage of the Chocolate Life, I'm logged in. Excuse me, I hit my microphone. It says account. Yours will say join. And if you're not logged in, join, become a free member. Or if you have the resources, become a premium member. Free members get early access to the Pyramid Tasting Handbook purchase offer, which extends through the end of November, after which the price will go up and it will be available on Amazon either as an EPUB or as a print-on-demand version. So just wanted to do that and let you know what's going on there. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about today is the EDR and EUDR and two related things that are going on in Europe. So the EUR is the EU deforestation regulations. And the big news is that within the last 60 days, the deadline for compliance has been moved from December 31, 2024 to some point in the future, at least a year, December 31, 2025. Now, it's also important to know that in the process of it being delayed, there is increased pressure from groups, one of which is, I'm going to do this. This is an article published by Greenpeace, which talks about efforts to dilute the regulations. It's couched in terms of simplifying them, but what it will do is it will actually reduce the effectiveness of the regulations, providing a whole bunch of loopholes that none of us wants to see, or Big Chocolate wants to see, because it turns out that it's a challenge to become fully compliant with EUDR. But there are two related bits of regulation that need to be considered when we talk about the EUDR. One of which we talked about very, very briefly with Anthony Fountain when I did my episode, late December, early January, um, about this topic, was something called the CSDDD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And there are aspects of what you think should be built into the EUDR that are not. It is focused solely on deforestation, that find themselves in the Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Right? So that's really important to know. But one of the things that's going on in the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is it says, it defines who has to comply with these rules. So in general, you need to have 1,000 employees in the EU and do $450 million in turnover globally. Right? And one of the things that happens is that if you fit into that magic bucket, right, then your downstream suppliers and upstream customers, right, need to be aware of the compliance issues associated with being compliant with this. So, right, and I learned this because somebody contacted me asking me about Tony's Chocolate Lonely, right, and talking about in general what's going on. But it turns out that they don't have 450 million euros in turnover globally. So they're at about 150 million. They're number 99 in candy industry's top 100 companies, making them a relatively large player in terms of retail sales. But a company like Tony's is not compliant with the CSDDD. It does not need to be compliant because they're too small a company. They don't have 1,000. I don't think they have 1,000 employees in the EU, and they're certainly not doing 450 million euro in turnover. What I will do is I will put some links to these places after the fact, so you can go and take a look. If you're in the EU and you want to know more about it, if you're in the United States and you're thinking of doing business in the EU, you need to be aware of these things: who is and who is not effective, and what do you need to be aware of in order to be compliant. So that's going to be there. But there's also a separate initiative, which is called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which fits into the puzzle associated with the CSD, the Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So it's there, and it talks about how you need to report, what are the requirements for reporting. It's very, very complicated. It's not going to be simple for anybody to be 100% compliant with all of these things. Again, if you're a non-EU business doing business in the EU, you need to go and take a look at these regulations in order to determine if your business is affected by any of the compliance requirements which are associated with any of these initiatives. For example, if you're buying cocoa from West Africa, and you're in the United States, you need to make sure that the cocoa is EUDR compliant, so that when you turn around and sell this product in the EU at perhaps as finished bars, what you'll be able to do is say, oh yeah, all of the cocoa in these bars is in fact EUDR compliant, right? Even though you are not located in the EU, right? You're sourcing cocoa. And the reason why sugar is not there is because almost all of the sugar land almost all the sugars in production is on land that was deforested prior to 2020, and the EUDR only takes a look at land which was deforested after, from 2020 forward. So it's hard to understand all the nuances, which why you should be up and aware of how these regulations might have an impact on your business, whether you're in the EU or whether you are in the EU or you're doing business in the EU, if you're located outside. So that's that. I want to do a quick note to say, I am going to be in Rushville, Indiana later this month for the first Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival. I'm going to be there. I'm presenting a number of different times. I'm not the ambassador, but something like that. I'm going to be giving opening remarks. So if you're in the Chicago, it's about a 4-hour drive from Chicago, about an hour from Indianapolis, about an hour from Dayton, about an hour from Cincinnati. If you're in that part of the world, come by, say hello. If you have a copy of my book, Discover Chocolate, bring that with you. I'd be happy to sign and inscribe it for you, and just generally enjoy the first craft chocolate specific festival in that part of the United States. And with that, I want to say thanks everybody for joining me for this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. And I will be back this coming Tuesday. I don't have, for episode 81, I don't have a particular topic yet for 81. If you have a topic idea that you'd like me to talk about, you can put it in the comments for today's episode. You can put it in the comments for the post for today's episode. Just let me know. You can do it on social media. There's an Instagram post for this topic. There's one on X. There's one on Blue Sky. I now have a handle, Discover Chalk, at bsky, .bsky. So I'm there on that. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me there. So if you have an idea for a topic you'd like me to jump into, I'd be happy to. Otherwise, I've got a couple of ideas for what it is that I want to do, and I'm going to go take care of them. Take care of taking a look at them, decide what it is that I want to do for this coming Tuesday. But I will be away for the Friday episode of Pod Save Chocolate during the Rushville. So this is the 22nd. So 8th, 15th to the 22nd of this month. And then I'm going to be with my family during Thanksgiving. And so I think I'm missing 3 episodes again around the Thanksgiving holiday. But with that, again, I want to thank everybody for joining me today, who've sat through the entire episode or joined at any particular time. And to remind everybody that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody,